In late 1939, the largest military on Earth began its marches of soldiers and thousands of tanks ground forward through a blinding snow of Eastern Europe shows the root of the combat year. The Soviet Union and Germany signed a secret pact, drawing a definitive line down the continent, suddenly placing Finland directly in the Soviet cross. Stalin demanded a large chunk of Finnish territory to act as a buffer zone for his own borders. But the Finns, politely but firmly, compares the initial Soviet invasion force to the total population of a small reference, sent more soldiers across the border than some entire nations have. A nation of farmers and lumberjacks was now staring down a global superpower that fully expected to conclude its campaign in a matter of commanders made a fatal miscalculation about the environment. Temperatures were dropping to minus 40 degrees, a cold so severe that engines freeze solid if they are ever turned off. Vehicles were forced into single-file columns down narrow logging roads surrounded by dense forests. When the engines stalled in the snow, those massive metal convoys became completely paralyzed. Responded with an ingenious local strategy called the Motti tactic. In Finnish, a Motti is a stack of firewood meant to be chopped down to size. This vector map shows the trap. Finns let a Soviet column stretch along a single road, then strike the front and back, dropping barricades to halt movement. Once boxed in, they chopped that line into smaller, isolated pockets, systematically picking apart the frozen off. The Finns' troops relied on total mobility. Wearing all-white camouflage, they glided silently through their home forests on skis to launch rapid ambushes and vanish back into the trees. These strikes were highly calculated. The Finns actively weaponized their own lethal weather and terrain to neutralize a massive technological advantage. The ultimate symbol of this localized resistance was a humble farmer named Simo Häyhä. The Soviets soon gave him a new name. The White would sit completely still in snowbanks for hours. He even packed freezing snow into his mouth so the enemy couldn't see his breath in the bitter cold. He made the careful decision to reject a magnifying sniper scope, relying entirely on his basic iron sights. A glass lens could reflect sunlight and immediately give away his basic iron sights. He officially eliminated over 500 enemy soldiers in fewer than 100 days. Häyhä's record demonstrates the outcome when an invading force pushes an opponent who possesses a deep, unbreakable mastery of their own backyard. As you can see on this map, the sheer numbers of the Soviet Union eventually wore down the defense. After 3 months of brutal fighting, Finland was forced to sign a peace treaty and concede these eastern slices of territory. Yet, despite giving up land, Finland remained a sovereign, independent nation. The Red Army's struggle was witnessed by the entire world. In Berlin, military observers noted the deep structural flaws in Soviet logistics and leadership, an insight that would directly influence German strategic planning for their own invasion of the USSR 2 years. War remains a definitive study in resilience. It proved that overwhelming numbers mean nothing against a people who adapt to their environment and refuse to surrender their home. The winter of 1939. In the dense, pitch-black forests of the north, the temperature has dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. It is a cold so absolute that the engines of heavy Soviet tanks freeze solid, literally cracking the metal wide open. The soldiers trapped beside these dead machines are completely paralyzed. They sit shivering in the dark, waiting. One by one, they are methodically picked off by an invisible entity operating in the tree line, a phantom the Soviet troops have started calling the White Death. These massive mechanized convoys were entirely bottlenecked. Heavy vehicles meant for rapid advancement were forced onto narrow logging roads, blocked in by deep snowdrifts. What the Soviet commanders planned as a triumphant multi-day march into a weaker nation rapidly devolved into an inescapable frozen nightmare. To understand how they got stuck out there, we have to rewind slightly. Earlier that year, Joseph Stalin signed a secret pact with Germany, dividing up Eastern Europe. Wanting a protective buffer zone for his own borders, he demanded a large cut of Finnish territory. Finland politely declined. Stalin responded by sending an invasion force across the border, possessing more soldiers than the entire population of some small countries. Hundreds of thousands of troops, thousands of tanks, and massive artillery lines marched straight toward Helsinki. Facing down this overwhelming, heavily armored machine was a tiny, outgunned population composed largely of farmers and lumberjacks. How exactly does a globally feared superpower, backed by an endless mechanical advantage, get systematically dismantled by men who chop wood for a living? The answer lies in the reality behind the myth. That terrifying White Death picking off soldiers in the dark was actually a single, humble Finnish farmer named Simo Häyhä. Häyhä operated on his home turf. He draped himself in all-white camouflage, allowing his silhouette to vanish entirely against the dense, blinding snowbanks of the forest floor. His physical endurance was extreme. To prevent the freezing air from turning his warm breath into a visible cloud of vapor, he would pack handfuls of freezing snow into his mouth, lying motionless for hours in the banks. He even refused to use a modern sniper scope. Glass lenses can catch stray sunlight and reflect a glare right back at the enemy. Instead, he relied purely on basic iron sights to maintain absolute stealth. By rejecting advanced technology and perfectly adapting to the harshest elements of his environment, Häyhä officially eliminated over 500 enemy soldiers in under 100 days. He made himself deadlier than an entire armored battalion. Häyhä was the ultimate distillation of Finland's broader military doctrine. They engaged in silent, agile warfare, moving quickly through the thick woods on wooden skis. The terrain itself did half the work. The deep snowdrifts and tight clusters of trees funneled those massive Soviet columns into single-file lines, leaving them zero room to maneuver. This diagram shows exactly how the Finns capitalized on that geography. They utilized a strategy called the Motti tactic. Motti is the Finnish word for a stack of firewood, meant to be chopped down to size. When a long Soviet column stretched out along a logging road, Finnish ski troops would burst from the tree line to strike the front and the extreme rear of the convoy, completely boxing the vehicles in. With the convoy pinned, the Finns would execute the final phase, slicing the trapped column into smaller and smaller isolated pockets. These scattered groups were then picked apart or simply left to freeze in the dark. The Motti strategy successfully turned the greatest strength of the Soviet army, its massive size and sprawling supply lines, into a lethal liability. 3 months of brutal fighting took its toll. The endless, grinding mass of the Soviet military eventually pushed through, forcing Finland to sign a peace treaty and concede some of their land. The aftermath left behind was devastating. Tens of thousands of casualties and shattered machines sat frozen in the wake of the conflict, a grim testament to the cost of Stalin's advance. Yet, against all mathematical odds, Finland retained its independence. A small nation of farmers forced a global superpower into a humiliating stalemate, exposing severe tactical vulnerabilities in the Soviet war machine for the entire world to see. The legend of the Winter War proves that overwhelming technological numbers mean very little when you are fighting a resilient people who know how to use the winter to defend their own backyard.